Hello and welcome to the Kent Hobengroiper podcast. Today is a special episode. We are joined by two guests, Joseph Goebbels. No, I'm kidding. Cal Crucis and Mission Kid Ultra. And
Hello.
We're going to talk about Christian film today. So, and I'm sure if you follow my page, you know who Cal is. You might not know who Mission Kid Ultra is, but he's a good friend. Anyway, so in this episode, we're going to explain to you what movies you should watch as a Christian. No, I'm kidding. We're going to discuss films we think that may have attempted to be Christian in nature and if they accomplished that, and so on. So we're going to start with discussing the morality of film because, well, you've probably met a fundamentalist at some point who has said, if you're watching a movie, basically, Satan has already entered your body. And I will start off by saying I think these people are more right than most normie Christians will give them credit for. And historically, actors have been considered immoral people, and that is still true today. But what do you guys think?
I mean, there's a lot that you could get into with the morality of an art form, or especially something as immersive as film. But I think that the fundamentalist reaction to sort of movies and movie theaters is you could sort of take that as a template for the reaction to culture as a whole, or American culture over the course of the 20th century, and the fundamentalists sensing like, this is slipping away from what it used to be. This is kind of like an enemy, hostile mind that's writing these scripts. And so they react to it very negatively, like, we need to close that off, we need to remain pure. And I don't think they were entirely wrong to feel that way. You know, there is obviously a lot of like really evil and subversive framing that goes on in cinematic storytelling, but I don't think that that makes the response of, we just need to shut this down and then never engage with it. That seems like a really brittle response that then only makes the forbidden thing more desirable and also makes you more kind of susceptible to it because you're not trained in how to engage with that media format.
These kinds of critiques were already made in the 17th. I mean, it probably goes back further, but in the 17th century and the proliferation of stage acting in England, most of the critics of the stage were Puritans. And part of it was because, I mean, just to clarify, Puritan really is just sort of an intense Protestant. It's an ethos. It's not really a faction. Those who want to further evangelize the church, particularly the Church of England. So,
Puritan means that you're saved,
not only
basically.
Puritan, what's that?
Puritan just means that you're saved, basically. That you're actually you're regenerate.
I mean, you took it seriously, but it didn't help that many Puritans were mocked on the stage. Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and many other playwrights had Puritan-esque characters, not too difficult to sort of suss out, who were oftentimes hypocrites. They were personally scoundrels, but they would hide behind religion, or they were like incorrigibly stupid and naive dupes that would fall for all sorts of scams. But that was also, I mean, it wasn't just kind of like being angry that they were Christianity or zeal was being mocked. But it was also, right, the lives of the actors, a lot of boys. Maybe this is before the idea of an actress, and so you would have boys playing female roles, and there was a lot of sodomy and the sort of things you would think about Hollywood going on in the background. And so I think a very balanced judgment. I mean, this is still applicable. It's kind of what Mission Kid Ultra says. That John Milton was himself involved in production of masks earlier on in his career, and he wrote poetry to be performed. But Milton was concerned that, yes, if you drive it all away, instead of trying to reform the institutions and correct them and try to remove the rot. If you just ban them, then you are going to get this underground backlash. And I think it's not only, and this is what we'll, I guess, look at, it's not only about the, policing the actions of the actors, but it's also what exactly is being demonstrated in the performance, whether it's film or a play, stage acting. Is it always wrong to perform something wicked on stage? Whether it's sexually licentious or violent or other kinds of things? Do all performances need to be morality tales? Or do you get at something much deeper, right? I mean, and this is almost a question of what is taught in the Bible itself, is what exactly are you learning through these sagas, stories, epics, and so on?
And there's a lot you could get into there with mimesis of, if we're enacting these things on stage or having young people watch this and then teaching them to enact that, does that actually make a long-term kind of ritualistic, habitual difference in their behavior, or is it artificial enough and distant enough from us that it isn't actually going to ingrain itself?
Well, I kind of had like a autistic discussion the other day with someone, and I was saying, well, personally, I think like depicting like violence is not quite the same. Like they were of like the opinion that, like depicting sin in like film is like evil, but I would say like, okay, well, look, depicting violence is one thing. I think like specifically like sex, right? Well, the difference between like depicting sex and violence is if I like see someone's breasts or something on the screen, it's, you're tempted to lust or whatever, versus if I see someone get their head cut off, I'm not necessarily tempted to go out and cut somebody's head off. Maybe I'm just like an insane like sex freak and the rest of you guys are fine seeing breasts in movies, but
yeah, I think that probably the only real equivalent would be like sort of really creepy kind of snuff film or gore or something like that, where the whole point is to sort of habituate you to get a thrill out of watching people be dismembered. But yeah, I think watching violence, I think there are mirror neurons going on, but just like in the same way that when you're watching an athletic game, like you're seeing people play out on the field, and your brain is like beginning to mimic their actions. So I think there is some of that, but it's a totally different thing when you're watching an image of someone be slain. That doesn't have to do with your anger necessarily or any murder in your heart. But then when you're watching, a naked woman or something like that, then you actually are, I think, like participating with her in some sort of sexual sense, or with whoever has constructed that image for you.
It's important to remember that the origins of the stage are deeply religious and tinged with the worship and celebration of particular gods. And I don't think you can ever really escape from that. But the question is whether you can use it in a different way. And I think what's even worse, and this is part of my appreciation of the acting of Nicolas Cage, is the dominant philosophy of acting today is some kind of perverse realism, where every role is being played as if you are trying to be the realistic character. And not only do people get sucked into a kind of false mimetic world where you think that's what real cops are like, or that's what real doctors are like, or so on and so on and so on, but you also you also are kind of tricked into thinking that this is the world that actually exists, as if like watching a film or a recording, or especially stuff like 2-minute clips that you find on social media, or looking at a photograph, as if that's just a window into reality. That's just what happened, and not that it's a production, that it's something that's stylized to bring something out that is not just on the surface. So you have to pay attention to how the mask is being worn, not forgetting that it is a mask being worn, that you think you're just looking at somebody's face.
Well, people have talked before about how like shows like The West Wing, or sort of like I think Aaron Sorkin was the writer or director or whatever for that. And so there's this very popular TV show that portrays, the president of the United States and all of his staff and that sort of thing. And there's this certain kind of like lib reverence that they have for that whole kind of proceduralism. And then people have commented on the people who now go into politics and who become staffers have all watched that show, or at least a generation of them did. And so they began to like imitate those attitudes and those tones and that kind of way of talking about their own role. They weren't being influenced by, actual people who had filled those roles in generations past. They're imitating this fictionalized version of what they're actually doing.
Right, and then it's this expectation on top of that when I never really watched much of The West Wing. I've seen clips, but there was one where Martin Sheen's character, he's the president, he confronts some fundy anti-abortion lady, and then he just grills her for 90 seconds with Bible references because I'm a Christian too, I'm just a liberal, and blah blah blah. And these are then watched and absorbed as if this is how real people would ever talk. And this is how a real argument would ever be conducted. And so then it's just, this then bleeds into real life with people like Ben Shapiro, or like liberal activists going out to like MAGA chuds and like trying to like, well, what are 3 of Biden's policies? Which policies do you object to? Oh, is it this law? Is it this act? Is it this executive order? And it's just, it's all kind of just play acting. And I think the real concern and the real crisis is that it's not only that we watch bad films or bad TV shows that teach us the wrong things about the world, that we start to meme them, but then every waking moment in life is like you're on stage. We're all just really garbage actors in a awful teledrama.
Yeah. Well, they say that, when The Godfather came out, all the mafia guys watched it and they loved it, and then they began to imitate The Godfather, and they started having sort of long philosophical monologues to themselves and becoming like a lot more wistful and that sort of thing. And they changed their manner based on how they saw it portrayed what a like really cool mafia don could look like and act like. And so
I heard this about Scarface too.
So, but the point being that like we totally adjust our manner based on what Hollywood puts out. Like you have these beautiful people going through these epic adventures or really, really compelling dramas. Our affections are moved, and then we just naturally begin to imitate them. I can only imagine what TikTok is going to do long term to the younger generation, but it's totally inculcating it's like everyday behaviors and self-conception. And so I think when it comes to presenting Christ in a film, for me, I don't think I would ever be comfortable doing that or supporting a film that portrayed Christ, because, well, I mean, if that becomes the popular image of who Jesus is, then everyone begins to imitate, that image that has been presented of Christ, rather than, sort of just actual everyday Christians who are supposed to be your image to imitate.
This is why I like the old film Ben-Hur, because the entire plot revolves around the life and acts of Jesus of Nazareth, but he's never once depicted in the movie. He appears in a few scenes off camera, like offering water or being judged, or eventually Ben-Hur, coming to the tomb of Jesus Christ and finding faith. But this is, this very roundabout way of depicting the gospel through the life and fall and sort of resurrection of this Jewish elite.
Yeah, that was one of the first films I wanted to discuss, actually, because I enjoyed that also, and I would say, like it can be like compared to the Ten Commandments, which is something I did not like the Ten Commandments as much, because, well, it looked cool, but it kind of felt like they were preaching another gospel, so to speak. Like the whole thing was about like human dignity or something like that. Do you remember that?
I mean, I think it's totally part of like 1940s, 1950s, mid-century kind of moralizing propaganda of like we're forging this Judeo-Christian ethos here that we all have in common that is like actually really quite separate from, you know, Orthodox Christianity, but we're gonna kind of pretend that we can all kind of glom together in order to support just post-war.
There's a great scene in a Coen Brothers movie called Hail Caesar where Josh Brolin plays the Hollywood producer, and he sits down with a Protestant pastor, a Catholic bishop, an Orthodox bishop, and then a Jewish rabbi, and is just trying to. He's like, it's a headache for him because they're all complaining about different parts, but he's just trying to get them all to just accept some common denominator. Like, or do you have objections? I don't care if it's good or not. Do you have objections? Will your people not watch it? And I think that's in forging this kind of. This typically 1950s Eisenhower-esque faith in faith, ecumenical, big God notion that is not communist.
Yep. I really do like that kind of era of big action films. You know, they got the Technicolor, they'll have these like big set pieces, like when they're having like the boat fights in Ben-Hur, or like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, that sort of thing. It's some really awesome special effects, and it's very, very vitalistic. Actually, I did a film class with some high school students last year, and we went through some of those films and just seeing the way that they portrayed warfare versus how like movies made within the past 10 years, kind of historical dramas, how they portray warfare is really a remarkable difference in terms of like the color and the energy and the masculinity of the Technicolor films versus the kind of like grit and grayness and just like self-doubt and honestly kind of wimpiness of the newer films.
Well, on the subject of like newer films, so something that like always kind of haunts me is like new productions like Jesus Revolution and The Chosen, like anything Jonathan Rumi is involved with. I really do not like that guy, as I've written about extensively. But like, yeah, like okay, so like you're talking about like depicting like Jesus, right? Yeah, I mean like The Chosen is like a masterclass in like what not to do. It's like what like okay, I will confess that I have not actually, I'm rendering really harsh judgments, but I have not actually sat down and like watched more than 10 minutes, I guess, of it. I can't bring myself to do it. Like I know what's in it. Like, you know, my favorite fundamentalist bloggers have already, 24 heresies in this episode of The Chosen. Like they've already done that. So maybe I'm operating completely off hearsay, but like from what I understand, it's like, what if Jesus was a quirky, relatable Netflix character, basically? And that to me is really bad, incredibly bad. Actually, okay, before we move out of that era real quick of like, 1950s, 60s, let me think, what year did it come out? A friend of mine recommended Piers, yeah, it was 1964. The Gospel According to St. Matthew, Piers Pasolini. And what he told me is that Pasolini is a disgusting, atheist, homosexual, communist. And his other films are, well, yeah. He told me that, well, the Gospel of Matthew, basically the guy just used the actual Gospel of Matthew as the script. I'm like, okay, well, I'll give it a try. And it's very rare that I watch like 20 minutes of a movie and I'm like, okay, I can't take this anymore. To be fair, the Gospel According, have either of you guys seen it?
I haven't.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I tried watching it. It was just so ugly. Like, and like everything was done just like kind of like, oh, Jesus is calling his disciple. Oh, or what was it? Jesus got baptized. Oh, Jesus is in the desert. Oh, the Satan came up to Jesus. Oh, okay, now they're done. Okay, Jesus is calling his disciples now. Oh, Sermon on the Mount. Like, I don't know. It was just like, it wasn't something that like, I'm like, at this point I could just read the Gospel of Matthew and the pictures I make in my head would be better So that was, but you know what? I mean, I guess if you're atheist, homosexual, communist, like, you know, the AIDS brain or the parasites or whatever is kind of getting, I guess they didn't have AIDS back then. Whoops. But, the parasite are getting to you.
I wonder with these things, when it comes to portraying Christ, like something that really shines through to me in the Gospels, it's the way that Christ acts with absolute self-confidence and honestly with a very, very kingly demeanor. You know, he's always speaking with authority. And my sense is that, especially in a recent production, nobody has a concept of how like a princely man actually behaves with like nobility of soul and with kind of like a regal attitude. So even not having seen The Chosen, I'm just going to assume that they don't know how to portray Jesus as someone who, and you know, I could be wrong on this, but as someone who has a full sense of his authority, if that makes any sense.
It's not even the regalcy, the royalty of his demeanor. It's also he doesn't none of the productions I've seen except. I was turned on by another poster named Ange to watch the 1970s Jesus of Nazareth TV series, miniseries, which I was really impressed. I didn't think I was gonna like it, but the other thing is not just the royalty of his demeanor, but also his alienness. There's a strangeness about Jesus, not as 19th century theology or piety would show. He's sort of just like staring at the clouds all the time, just totally alienated. He's a beautiful soul who just can't really deal with the inanity and madness of life. But an alien,
tragic romantic young man.
Yeah. But just a fundamentally strange figure who just stands in judgment of everything around him. And so it is not only just this princely demeanor, somebody who just has airs about himself that he's just weighty, but also somebody who seems to come from somewhere else. He's not beholden to anybody. He can't be bought or sold by anybody. He's kind of aloof from the meanness of human life. And I think that's also what often is difficult to portray, because from the brief experience I have watching The Chosen, like it's just Jesus sort of dissolved into this friendly, kind of whimsical buddy guy who helps you out of your problems, and
he gets
I find
us,
the whole thing just disgusting.
The same ethos.
Well, I was laughing because a friend of mine went to theaters, and apparently that's how big The Chosen is, that it's in theaters. They put like the first 3 episodes of the next season, and he said, okay, so when it was so funny. He's like, so when I sat down, Dallas Jenkins, who we'll discuss in a minute because he's another reprehensible individual, Dallas Jenkins, he was on the screen. He said, okay guys, there's gonna be a big spoiler, don't tell anyone. Okay, I'm like, what, like Jesus dies or something, like what? But apparently they like keep making up these irrelevant side plots to pad out the show. And I guess one of the disciples' girlfriend gets stabbed by a Roman soldier by accident in front of Jesus. And whichever one of the disciples it was is like, Jesus, do something. And like Jesus is just like shakes his head and is like, no. It's just so weird. Like,
police violence has to happen. It's foretold.
I have no clue. Like, so like Dallas Jenkins, like the guys, like if you like look at a picture of Dallas Jenkins, there's something off about him. Cal, you're good with this stuff. Look up Dallas Jenkins right now and tell me what you think is going on there. But
gaydar, strong gaydar thing there.
I don't know. There's something up with his face. But
it's like the life had left him. Like he's one of those like Invasion of the Body Snatcher clones.
Dante talks about that, right? That some people walk on the earth even when their spirit has long departed because they're just a host.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the guy's freaky. I like how for every episode, This is where you gotta love evangelicals, because I was like telling this to like some evangelicals. I said, yeah, so apparently every episode he consults a Catholic priest, a Mormon minister, and a rabbi to make sure everything's accurate. And like my evangelical buddy's like, what about a Christian? And it was yeah, exactly.
Well, he's literally doing the scene from Hail Caesar, which is a great movie.
I haven't seen it. I'll have to take a look. But
yeah, so I have a question for you guys, which is, we talked about like there is this specter of immorality with film, and I feel like we could agree, yes, films can be a bad moral influence on society, but is it possible for it to be the opposite? Is it possible to have a film that is so sort of morally constructed that it basically inclines the soul to justice as it perceives the film?
yes, and the name of that film is Drive, starring Ryan Gosling.
I think it's a good question, because this disturbed me in a personal way, where I was recommending something that left a very strong impact on me to a personal friend, and I thought recommending this and trying to get him to watch this would kind of spur something in his heart to want to live a more meaningful life. And I was kind of disappointed when he told me he already seen that years ago. and I think this is, I want to introduce this, and we can come back around to this as well. But it's not just in the production of something, as if it's going to have a clear effect on the viewer. Right, every art is going to have a range of responses, and the responses are from the judgment of the viewers. If you have bad viewers that F's you bad judgment, they're going to totally misunderstand, or they're going to have a very shoddy appreciation of what the art in question is trying to accomplish.
Right.
And I think this is what I want to introduce is we have to take seriously that evangelicals don't seem to be able to make good art. And I think this is part of the problem. I don't think it's something. This is something that kind of a crank goofball theologian Peter Lightheart kind of mocked about a decade or so ago, where he said that Protestants can't make art, and then of course people dogpiled him and said, yes, they can. Haven't you ever listened to Bach? Haven't you ever listened to Milton's poetry, or so on and so on and so on? But it does raise this interesting question that even to suggest this, right? You have all these Catholic and Orthodox directors, right? We'll probably get to later, like, lapsed Catholic like Scorsese, or Orthodox like Tarkovsky. But evangelicals don't seem to make good movies, and it's not just because they're locked out of Hollywood. Even when they have high production, which they can raise money, their plots are awful, the characters are thin. Things like God's Not Dead is like the most vulgar kind of morality play. And I think it's this obsessive focus on trying to get the viewer to understand the point of the message, and that there's a moral at the end of it, kind of hamstrings you. Because if you have to bash someone in the head with what is this actually about, what are we learning, it usually creates one of the most dull performances and very colorless forms of art that you can imagine. And this is not just localized to evangelicals in a kind of Christian consumer ghetto, but this is every kind of libtard media production, where they have to tell you, there's some kind of like long monologue to tell you why the good guys are good, the bad guys are bad, and with some zingers and one-liners about why we're gonna win.
Well, it's almost like evangelicals were the original woke movie makers. Go evangelize, go broke. Yeah.
I think it's this moralizing bent. I think that's what it's the shared thing. Like you can find, there's the whole the quip that left can't meme, and you look at any leftist meme and there's just walls of text. They have to explain everything that's happening and kind of hold your hand to judgment, and then
Ben Garrison does it. It's based
comic, and like it's very obvious what is being told, and it can be kind of funny every now and then.
I think that's a super bad habit.
The problem.
Yeah, I think that's a super bad habit, to be moralizing instead of just paying attention to reality. I think Nathan Fielder's The Curse that just came out was really good because it sort of deals with some woke themes, but it's just really paying like obsessively precise, close attention to reality rather than trying to sort of make some statement. That might be why evangelicals always get off on the wrong foot, because like the whole point of being an evangelical is that you want to share the gospel with people, or in a lesser sense, if you're making media, you want to share morality with them. But the point of art, like if you're directing the art at moralizing, I think that fails. But I think that the problems go way deeper. I think a lot of evangelicals are aware that the come to Jesus moment in an evangelical story is really hokey. I think they're aware of those problems, but they go so much deeper in terms of sort of like the talent infrastructure of the evangelical world is, we've always been kind of ghettoized for the past 100 years, ever since the split basically between liberals and kind of conservative believers. And so you've always had the conservative believers kind of beleaguered off in the hinterlands and not really having much of a foothold on the culture, whether in academia or media or anything like that. And so I think there's just generations of kind of brain drain that have happened from that, where if liberals control the center of the culture, then anyone who is talented or like wants to do anything with their career has to go immerse themselves in a totally liberal or just godless progressive environment. And so there really just is no kind of center of gravity or institutional gravity that can like keep young, talented evangelical people from just going off the rails basically, or just going completely quiet about what they come from.
Well, Cal mentioned Tarkovsky earlier, so Tarkovsky is interesting. I wanted to bring up Andrei Rublev later, but we might as well talk about him now because he was very much a moralist. I mean, I think his second film, was it? No, his third film. Maybe it was his fourth. I'm not sure. Solaris. I think like supposedly he made it because it's a science fiction film. He like made it because he thought like 2001: A Space Odyssey was like atheist and evil or something like that. That's what I've heard. I don't know how true that actually, but he very much was a moralist. He said he wants all of his films to like remind people to love or something like that. And I mean, Andrei Rublev is very on the nose. I mean, it's you have to give Andrei Rublev a lot of credit because it's the only the only depiction of Eastern Orthodoxy I've ever seen that didn't make me hate Eastern Orthodoxy more after seeing it. So that's amazing. That's a feat right there. I guess Cal, you didn't watch it yet, did you?
No.
I mean, it's good. So like the premise.
I will only just say the problem isn't morals in movies. It's moralizing. It's a disposition to how you share your morals.
Well, yeah, so he does it with a lot of tact. Like, has anyone here seen Stalker?
I haven't yet.
That one's good. Well, okay, we won't discuss his films then, but it basically, yeah, he's interesting, and it's funny. I think like a couple of his films ended up on the Vatican list of films, which I was actually looking at earlier, which is kind of keck. What is the Whore of Babylon? What films do they like over there? But.
Well, I think Tarkovsky is interesting because he's making movies that talk about Christianity, in a communist society, which is, relevant for us. And the communists had not allowed people to make movies about Christianity in that way. But finally, by the time Tarkovsky comes along with Andrei Rublev, they'd thawed enough some of the policies that allowed him to portray Christianity as like fundamental to Russian national identity. And that's something that had been
for years.
Yeah, that had been on ice. And so he's kind of reviving this like Dostoevsky idea or idea that you see in Dostoevsky of like there's some kind of like deep Christ it's something essentially sort of Christian or even Christ haunted, if you want to say, about the Russian ethos of like, oh, we're always miserable, we're always suffering, but we're doing so with a intense focus on Jesus at the same time, and I think it's compelling.
I guess one thing I wanted to mention earlier, because we talked about Dallas Jenkins, but of course he is the father of, what was his name? He was the son of one of the Left Behind creators, whose exact name is escaping me. Hold on, let me look it up.
But Tim Jenkins or Bill Jenkins?
Jerry B. Jenkins.
Jerry Jenkins, yeah.
Now, Left Behind is something I find particularly offensive because I think it teaches very false doctrine that will endanger people's souls. So it's not something I'm a fan of at all. I don't think, are either of you guys, well, obviously Cal isn't, but I don't think Mission Kid Ultra, you aren't a dispensationalist, are you?
No, my parents were a little bit that way, but they never emphasized it super much. So they were very, very moderate about it. They weren't kind of like the wacko people who are obsessed with sort of imminent destruction.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something, I feel like it really has like a grip on basically the vast majority of evangelicals that I know personally. Like this like sort of Left Behind, like, because this is something that bothers me, because like you do like 5 seconds of research on like the rapture in the Bible and you're like, yeah, this is retarded, like where did they get this from? And like they say it's, I don't know, some like 14-year-old hysterical teenage girl had a vision of the rapture and then somehow that ended up in the Schofield Study Bible, something like that. That's what I've heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, I don't know why how that got so popular.
I think
pretty
it fuses with the natural American interest in sort of the end of the world and sort of Cold War era paranoia. It's just the kind of evangelical Zionist spin on it. But I'd argue it's just the same ethos, just kind of repackaged in a different worldview framework.
Heck, I mean, I might even argue that like Left Behind is like the work of the devil, honestly, which it's more so than any like X-rated film, because everyone knows the X-rated films are bad, but or at least every Christian knows.
When I encountered Left Behind, I was not a believing Christian. I had kind of a vague upbringing, and I found it at a bookstore, and I was reading it, and I really liked it. And my takeaway from the first book was, I'm definitely not going to be a Christian, because this like apocalyptic world sounds pretty cool to live through. Like I can like join God's side after the rapture.
Yeah. Well, that sort of gets at something, which is that are evangelicals kind of culpable for producing such terrible cultural products that it maybe actually turns people away from the faith? Like at what point do we become kind of guilty for being so corny, so cringe? I don't think that it's necessarily a Christian's job to like create some super high impressive culture that then brings in the nations because like, oh, your aesthetics are so beautiful or something like that. But I think there's something to it. We've been so lazy and so neglectful that people look at evangelical culture and they say, wow, this is like a really kind of shoddy culture. Why do I want to be associated with it?
Right. I mean, I think it's worth saying that as much as one can criticize the corny plastic nature of evangelical culture, when people turn around and say, well, that's why I'm a Catholic, you've never seen like village Catholicism, like your Irish grandmother's kitschy, like Obi-Wan Kenobi looking Jesus, cards and pictures, plastic rosaries, plastic statues. Padre Pio looks like something from like Dante's Inferno. There's an awful world of Catholic and Orthodox kitsch. Orthodox, I think, is a little bit more controlled because the standards for icon production and art are very highly regulated, and that's become tradition over centuries. But the kitsch of most traditionalists is abhorrent, and the goal is not to make like some ruins that then can be admired centuries after a civilization collapse. But I will only say that there was a good like academic history on the Great Awakening that was revisionist in the sense that it was called Light Darkness Falls in the Land of Light by the guy named Winiarski. And Winiarski argues that the Congregationalists in New England, the Calvinists, had established a pretty functional day-to-day life for most of the villages of New England, which were basically self-governing republics. And the Great Awakening was not, actually New England was mostly rationalist and godless, and it was this revival of the gospel. It was an incredibly socially chaotic and destructive events or series of events that tore these towns apart and kind of ruined a lot of kind of day-to-day piety for people. And the relevance of this is, I think, evangelical piety or evangelical lived theology can often overemphasize the decisionism, the emphasis on the moment you converted, but there's not really any life after that. All you can do is try to get more people to convert, but you then easily, and you can see a lot of evangelicals who are like this, even if they're good-hearted people, they don't find any joy in the gospel. It is something that they just adhere to because it saves them, and it's true, and it's our religion, and it's, or it's not religion, it's a relationship with Jesus. It's a personal relationship. But that's all that it goes through, and it kind of feeds off of a very sentimental, emotional mindset, which I think is why a lot of evangelical women tend to be more pious than the men. But there is no struggle, there is no process of sanctification, there is not a deepening in godliness that is regulated and discussed. There's only like trying to not fall off the wagon. And I think if that is the core of your ethics and the core of your kind of working theology, all you can do is just remember the day that you were saved, and everything after that is sort of irrelevant.
Right. Well, I think
this is translated into art. This is why evangelical movies are all fixated on the moment of conversion, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of the evangelical ethos, and it's this, it's kind of surrendering of the culture at large, where Christianity is about this spiritual relationship that you have, or this moment in your life where everything changes, but then sort of like once you have your heart transformed, then what's the end result of that? You can then just be a normal participant in society. It's like get your life turned around, you become a good citizen, you can participate in America, which America, of course, is like paradise on earth, basically, because of all of our freedoms and all of our suburban comforts. And so the more that you participate in that, then basically you're getting to live the heavenly existence already. Versus seeing American society as something that needs to be fundamentally like reformed, like from the heart out, and just like everything needs to be reconstructed.
Yeah, this gave me an idea for a question, which I'll save for the end. But I think it is a good one. Before we get there, though, briefly, I wanted to I guess before we came on, we were talking about the Passion of the Christ, which I haven't seen. Cal hasn't seen. Mission Kid has indeed seen, but is that pro-Catholic? And actually, yeah, I guess we could talk like kind of because the other movie, Man for All Seasons, which I saw yesterday. Well, I guess I finished it today. Kind of this pro-Catholic propaganda push, which as good Protestants we don't appreciate, but.
Well, I think it's funny that you bring those two together because they are like photo negatives in some ways. The Man for All Seasons is about how Thomas More is an intelligent, reasonable, rational man. Catholicism is the religion of the thinking man. And then Protestantism is just the combination of youthful religious zealots like Thomas More's son-in-law, who's become convinced of Dr. Luther's teachings. And then also scoundrels like Henry VIII, who's just interested in getting a divorce and being a tyrant. And then the Passion of the Christ is the other side of Catholicism. So actually, Catholicism is a totally insane, emotional, like aesthetics. It's about entering into the sufferings of the God man. It's not some, like just the reasonable man getting put down by the forces of unreasoning barbarism. This is like something that is primal in its emotional frenzy to focus on the sufferings of the Son of God and in having your heart melted by it. It's not making an argument. There's nothing.
It's the
there's
passion,
nothing normal or reasonable about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
It's all
yeah, I
about
guess,
flesh and blood.
briefly on like A Man for All Seasons, like it kind of annoyed me. Like that's like another that is propaganda, because like you read I don't know, you read about Thomas More for like 5 seconds, you're like, oh yeah, this guy wanted to like kill people for like reading the Bible. Like, you know
Yeah,
what?
they don't show you the burnings that he did.
He like locked the Protestants up in his house or whatever, and like, though he promises he did not torture them when they were in his house. No, nuh-uh. You know what? Maybe he deserved it. Maybe he deserved killing people for the truth. Maybe he deserved to like die over like something stupid, like a royal marriage. It is kind of interesting because like the moral question.
Yeah, Man for All Seasons shows how we need wise tradcaths who can resist the evil influence of Trump on the American right.
Exactly. Yes. That was like one of the letterbox reviews. It was like, man, I remember when evangelicals used to like this movie, about not wavering on moral conscience for a man who, what did it say? Let's find it. That the idea being that it's sinful to compromise your devotion to God by supporting a corrupt leader and to shrug off his womanizing ways in order to gain political advantage. I guess that makes me old, that I can remember those days.
Yeah, I think Henry VIII was pretty much justified, about as justified as Trump is. Catholicism is just like the deep state now. He had to make a break.
They never mentioned that the church owned 25% of arable land in England.
Yeah.
And that they were, basically outside of his jurisdiction.
It's like same thing with like
Luther, right? Yeah, I could go on about Henry VIII, but I will just say that there are the two sides of the tradcath. There's the like postmodern, almost irrational or irrational focus on worshiping God and mysticism and this sort of thing, and this Protestants all rational and bloodless, and then the flip side is the bow tie, pints with Aquinas type. It's about intellect and theology and having a brew and smoking your pipe and thinking G.K. Chesterton quotes. And this is the Man for All Seasons. So it's like these two are kind of glued together within Roman Catholicism, but they're kind of like jagged pieces together. And they're just used rhetorically to either paint Protestants as bloodless rationalists or emotional maniacs.
But what I think is a little bit undeniable, at least in our culture right now, is that they are better at getting themselves painted a certain way. Like in movies, Christian representation is pretty much always Catholic, just because Catholics are so kind of like distinct. They manage to maintain some of their ethos even with Vatican II and everything like that, versus you almost never get a Protestant minister depicted in mainstream cinema, because a mainline Protestant minister is sort of indistinguishable from any other like school teacher or liberal civil servant or something like that. They're too normal and they don't stick out enough.
Right, and there's no way of demonstrating. I'm sure in countries like England or Scandinavia, showing a Protestant pastor is not that difficult, because there's some kind of giveaway, there's some kind of position where you don't have to come on, because if you were to show an evangelical pastor, it'd just be a guy with like a suit and a tie for the most part. So how would you even know who he is without having to tell everyone, oh, this guy's a pastor?
Well, the visage of Steven Anderson is recognizable around the world. So
he's a classic, but I think part of it is just it's hard to demonstrate this symbolically, but I made this kind of like a goofy political compass graph for like how to depict different kinds of Catholicism in media. But it's just much easier to do. It's how do you show a priest? Oh, it's a guy with a collar and in a kind of Gothic looking chapel.
Vampires, John Carpenter. You guys see that?
Yeah, that's a classic.
I mean, that's kind of hilarious because you got like the Padre like hanging out with like the vampire hunter. It's after like a successful hunt, and they got like the hookers and the beer out, and it's just kind of funny. But
Right. I mean, and I think this is part of the appeal to this, because I think the biblical Christian worldview is difficult to want to show in a way where you have this kind of dual world. Evil is convincing and compelling. It's quite powerful. And then heaven is trying to do its best. And so you have movies like one of my preferred B movies is the Constantine movie with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
But it's like an even match. Heaven and hell, they both like have this truce where they're just like sending influencers into the world, and we're going to try to get men to be good or evil. And maybe this is also just people's instinctive sense of, well, I mean, I guess you could call this Pelagianism if you want to be like technical
Nerd.
about it or something, but like, yeah, or a nerd. But it's just like, it's a coin flip, right? God votes for you, the devil votes against you, and you get to make the last choice. And that creates more drama in a plot where you really could go either way. The devil really could win. Constantine is a hero, but he's also going to go to hell. James Woods in Vampires is a like degenerate, but he's kind of has a reason to be. His family was killed by vampires. The church is corrupt, but like he's on God's side. So then the pastor, the priest is like getting drunk with all the hookers, but he's not but that's sort of besides the point, and God is sort of like a magic well that you tap into to fight the forces of evil.
Most of the hookers died brutally, so could be like a little bit of a moral lesson there.
But yeah, I think what this reveals is that Protestantism just does not lend itself to theatricality, right? It's sort of built in. Like in Protestantism, there's an emphasis on the invisible, iconoclasm, modesty, and sort of stripping back the gaudy, sort of lurid elements of medieval religion. And so, I love that way of faith. I think it's far closer to what we see in Scripture as being expected of God's people. But when it comes to making a spectacle, you go to the Sistine Chapel, and they've just done a better job of making a spectacle of themselves.
I don't think there's anything intrinsic to Protestant theology, however you quite define it. It's just a failure of imagination. I think trying to depict the sovereignty of God in the Samson story, which I think I just did a podcast episode for myself on John Milton, and I end with Samson Agonistes, and you do have this very human but unrelentingly victorious, righteous Samson, even though he suffers these blows. And I think a lot of people just don't like the idea of God's sovereignty, and therefore it's very hard to depict this to an audience. You'd rather have it all up to these human actors, or if God gets involved, he's just as powerless, or he's just on the same playing field as everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And in Catholicism, you can allow this to be depicted better because you have this whole hierarchy of angels and saints that are all operating, against the forces of hell. And then, of course, in the evangelical world, you stripped a lot of that back, except, the evangelicals are, liked watching Touched by an Angel back in the 90s or whatever. But a lot of the supernaturalism is stripped back, but it's still, the main actors are these people. And then, of course, the story revolves around the decision to convert.
Yeah. Well, so do you guys know Paul Schrader? He did Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was raised Calvinist. He went to Calvin College. I think he grew up in Grand Rapids. But he's a great director, great filmmaker, but he left the faith in order to pursue film more. So I think there's just this divide where even when someone is coming up within, I don't think there's anything inherent in sort of conservative Protestantism that like makes you a bad artist. I think that it's the culture that is developed. If you want to pursue great art, you increasingly chafe against the culture that's there, and for many people, they just they either just go on to do practical things, or they make the leap into some other religion or abandon religion entirely.
Well, I guess I started watching Cromwell today, and I didn't get to finish it, unfortunately. But I do think that was at least the first hour of it, like an excellent. Like I love the scene where Cromwell's in the church, and they're about to pray, and he looks up and he sees the. They got the, I don't know what it's called, but the thing where they have the hosts in it, and he like flips out and curses the king and knocks it all over, and
oh yeah, the monstrance. They've got the monstrance up there.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing with like spectacle, so like I think what Protestants tend to lapse into, because they don't really go for visual spectacle, at least not in the same way Catholics do, but they will go for verbal spectacle, which is kind of like exemplified in like the Pentecostal pastor screaming his head off, and I guess people love that stuff. And or even so like we watched Don Verdeen, which Cal recommended to us. I saw it yesterday. I think Mission Kid Ultra saw it yesterday, and I think the best character in that movie, my favorite character, was like the guy who used to be like a Satanist priest and left Satanism and like started a church, but he's like still like he's like hissing at people and stuff. Like I thought that was that was hilarious, and especially how like the other pastor said he keeps his congregation with like a fear of the occult, and like it showed like a clip of his sermon where he's saying like like cereal called grape nuts is like satanic because like nuts is like a.
If Satan can get in there and get you to start your day off wrong, he's gonna do it, trust me, and he's gonna do it through breakfast cereal. Okay? Listen to some of the deviant names of these cereals. Grape nuts. Grape nuts. Nice try, Satan. Nuts, testicles. Come on, don't get that image in my head in the morning. Banana nut crunch. Yeah, we know what the nuts are. We've established that. Bananas, we know what that is. It's a penis. Well, I'm here to tell you that each and every time you spoon into a bowl of Lucky Charms, you might as well be partaking of Lucifer's sacrament. I mean, come on. Turn it around. Let's get God's cereal in you. Start the day off with a little God in your life. You know what I eat? I eat life. I eat Raisin Bran. I eat Special K.
That to me is like a very that's a very real thing, which is why it's funny. I mean, there really are like the fear of the occult thing.
Making people afraid of the occult ending up becoming just as culty as people who are trying to be occult.
Yeah, it's like there's like subliminal messages in my music that's that's convincing me to worship Satan, or like I don't know, whatever these people believe, or that like the devil is you don't want to give the devil a foothold. But I think that also includes like seeing him where he isn't and jumping at shadows.
Well, that's part of the joke in the movie is that he's in competition with the church that wants Don Verdeen to come and show biblical archaeological finds, and that there's this drive. So I mean, I guess this is like the temptation is the spectacle, right? Oh, come to our Catholic church. We have the bones of like 4 apostles in our church. Or come to our church. We have Caravaggio paintings. And then in the evangelical world, it's like, oh, like our pastor like can cast out devils from like your toaster, or oh, our pastor like he has the skull of Goliath. He's going to show that he invited a guy who can speak in tongues, and there's a different kind of spectacle that then creates this kind of vulgar like market competition. And this is
Well,
this
it
isn't
was really funny,
you know,
though.
this is what happens when you have multiple faiths. If we could only just have one faith, but you would have the same kind of competitions between different churches in the same town, even if they were in the same communion.
Well, I thought it was also really funny, like how what's it called? What was the first pastor's name? The one who, or Lazarus, yes, yeah, Tony Lazarus, who died while he was in the car with the hooker, and like God sent his spirit back, and he married the hooker and started like that. That's hilarious, because yeah, it's it kind of is like that sometimes. There's just like who's got like the most absurd. I like that one Steven Anderson clip where he's like making fun of the. Like the people with the crazy conversion stories. Like, look, not to malign those people, but it is like at some point you have to like cut out the, oh man, I was doing so much meth. I was doing meth every day, man. Meth all the time. And then I got saved. Like, you know the clip. Maybe I'll find it and put it in.
Yeah. It's you know, it's a great thing that people can get radically transformed and just be like the worst kind of human being, and God says like I choose you, even though you're sort of like at the very bottom of your life or at the bottom of what a human being can be. But then when they turn around and like try to start leveraging that for attention and respect, then it gets a little toxic.
Well, it's funny. I had an argument with my dad. So my dad's been like reading this book from. Let me find it. Hold on. I can't find what it's called. Hold on. Ruth. Oh, yeah, it's Practicing the Way. No wonder I couldn't find it. Yeah, it's called Practicing the Way or whatever. My dad's like reading it, and basically it's like this like Tim Keller type guy who's like this like city guy and New York Times best-selling author, and basically like the book is like don't try to be like Jesus, try to be a representation of Jesus, like, or something stupid like that. It's just like all splitting hairs, and my dad's like he bookmarked this page and like, here, look at this.
Oh, and John Mark Comer. I keep hearing about this guy everywhere. I think he's going to be one of the next big like gurus.
And he'll be executed in Gitmo. But yeah, so I don't know. He had somewhere in his book about basically how his son was upset because like some like crazy street preacher like accosted him and his friends. And he's like, oh, you know, I'm like trying to convert my friends and now they think all us Christians are crazy. And I said like, well, look, it's funny because I just heard a story like that myself. A girl I know, evangelical, she was telling me, you know, she works and she's the only Christian in her workplace, and she's like trying to be like a good example of a Christian to them. And then like at the mall where they work, some like crazy guy with a shirt that says prayer warrior came in and like started screaming at the top of his lungs how they're going to escort him out of the mall, but he wants everyone to know that Jesus saved them from alcoholism, and like a bunch of people with him with shirts that said prayer warrior on. And I guess I'm like, yeah, like you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't, but my dad was like, no, like you got to do street preaching, because he just like picked up this book on like George Whitefield. He's like, no, you got to do that stuff. How can you judge that stuff? I'm like, well, look, it's you can't have people thinking like you have to have nuance with these things. Obviously, street preaching is like the liberal New York elite Christian guy who's like, oh no, you can only evangelize to people by you just don't. By building relationships with them. No, that's stupid and wrong. Nobody wants to have nuance. People always want to be lazy and say, oh, you can only do it this way or you can only do it that way, and they never want to say, well, you can do it this or that way, but you have to do it the right way, and you have to not be like a retard about it. Nobody wants to say that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big part of evangelical culture, and why some of the reasons that we don't produce good kind of cultural artifacts or art is that people in evangelicalism are very hesitant to criticize each other, I think, over you know, non-serious issues, you know, because we want to be nice, we want to be charitable, but part of what makes a really robust, strong aesthetic culture is when you have people criticizing things constantly and arguing and really, you know, challenging each other and having a degree of psychological intensity to really push things forward. But if you're always kind of pumping the brakes or holding off because you don't want to be mean to your brother, then, you know, that's great and all if you're being nice, but one of the bad fruits of that is that sort of just like dumb cultural practices stick around and don't get demolished enough, and people don't get.
Well, that's kind of the twisted thing about it, because evangelicals are extremely self-critical, always denounce. I mean, it's sort of what we're participating in right now. Oh, the evangelical church has failed on, this or that social issue. We've been too hard on this. We've been too hard on that, and it's not criticizing the things that deserve criticism. So I don't think we should tone police each other, because are we being charitable with the people who may be same-sex attracted or something? Or do they really want to come to their church? Are our churches too white? Are they, or blah 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 blah. And then turning a blind eye to producing like loads of garbage in terms of literature, sermons, books, articles, self-help things, and so on and so on. Like, that stuff needs to be raked over the coals. People really need to be given a hard time over preaching bad sermons and producing bad books and bad movies and bad music. But then when it comes to whatever possible quote unquote failures about racial or class or whatever, all this other stuff, I think that should be passed over probably much more than it is.
Right. Well, because
we constantly re-examine ourselves.
Because if you criticize the group for like some perceived racial injustice, you will get nothing but love and veneration for pointing that out or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you say something that will offend women, then you're done, right? You're no longer respectable. You're no longer worthy of having a public voice. Yeah, exactly. If you make women mad in the evangelical church, then that shows that you're not qualified to be speaking to the community. And so what that means is that you can't really have a robust culture of criticism, or one might even say a culture of critique. But I think that's something that we really desperately need if we want to have any hope of, just producing anything in this life, in this culture. And I don't think that the church should be overly focused on that. I don't think that Christian life should be reduced to cultural production just because I happen to really like cultural production. But yeah, I just see that as a big weakness in.
Well, part of the problem is if you're not engaged in cultural production, a lot of evangelicals will say things like, "Well, is this really a gospel issue? I want to focus on the gospel. I don't want to focus on culture. This is culture, not the gospel." This is all downstream from I don't know where, but it's just this mud hill that's been sliding for quite a while. But culture and cults are inextricably intertwined. So if you don't have an evangelical culture, if you're not focused on producing at least some effects, the waves aren't going to create the boat. But if you have a boat, you're going to create waves. And if you say, "Oh, I want to be a boat without waves," first of all, you're not going to go anywhere. But second of all, you are probably living on the waves of someone else's production. And so then you're going to be totally captured by some other imaginary. So a lot of the most degenerate loser, not woke scolds, Eva scolds, worrying about, are we treating our women well enough, and blah, 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 all the other issues. Like, they're totally captured by Marvel slop, Disney slop, Star Wars slop, all this stuff that has the most vulgar and idiotic cosmological accounts of where we came from and where we're going and what our ethics are. And then these people turn around and pretend like that doesn't impact the very gospel that they claim is distinct from culture.
So you're saying the gospel according to Star Wars does not cut it?
No, but they will even deny. I mean, we're being silly, but they will deny that that's actually how they reason. But what we started with is the deeply religious aspects of the stage and film, ultimately, is ignored. It's secularized, but it's the roots are still there. And so our ethics, what we find meaningful and moving is, whatever errors of the Passion of the Christ, at least brought back this old school passion play for a modern audience. But people will deny this stuff and say, "Oh, it's not about culture. It's not about culture." but then their gospel's totally transformed, and they basically live like they're Captain Iron Man, and they're on a team, and the pastoral team is like the Avengers, and Jesus, let's find Jesus in the Marvel movies, but instead of
it's true, they do
instead
this.
of like doing some kind of criticism, they're just totally recapitulating the Marvel ethic in a Christian skin suit, and they don't even know that they're doing it.
Yeah, they're trying.
The authority that they have
They're saying that they're bringing the gospel to the culture, but really they've just hollowed out the gospel and replaced it with the culture, and they don't even know the difference. They assume that a specific 21st century ethic that we have, about everything, like that's what gospel content is. But
right, and this is why something like The Chosen is just like Joss Whedon, from what I've seen, Joss Whedon-esque, like little quirky zingers and one-liners and winks and nods.
Yeah.
And this is just like Marvel movie writing, but given a first century Bible context.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's actually what my old youth pastor, who I liked a lot, and he's like, it's so funny because he's like not big into like, he's not quite into like Q stuff, but he's like close, he's Q adjacent. Telling me like how he like knows a guy who like knows a guy who knows Q, or like stuff like that. But I remember like Sunday nights, like inexplicably he like did this series like where we like watched like some like modern goy slop like Netflix TV show. I don't remember what it was. It was like fairy tale themed. It was like something like how like fairy tales like came to the real world, or like they sent like fairy tale character, I don't know, something like that. And like we're like watching it to like discuss like the biblical themes, and it's like, why? Apparently he did that like recently with like Inside Out or something, and I'm like, what's going on? Like there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the Netflix show or in Inside Out that like we could get anything out of. This is like these are like made by like soulless like secular shills. Like they don't have anything good. They don't have anything good for us. There is nothing there.
Secular. Yeah, well, so I think that is indicative of just like the evangelical trend, which is that you're not really firm on your own cultural foundations. You're just going to give the kids Disney and then talk about it to see if it lines up with the Bible or something like that. And I think that is sort of a cultural pact that the evangelicals made, many of them reacting against like the fundamentalism that they may have grown up with or have encountered earlier in their life. That was kind of my parents' experience. They grew up kind of fundies, and then eventually came around to the idea of, we can listen to rock music. Like, look at these Christian rock bands, and slowly reacclimating themselves to American pop culture. But then I think they went too far in the other direction. They were reacting for good reasons. Like the fundamentalists were not wise in how they reacted against the culture. They didn't have a positive vision. It was very negative and not substantive. And so you get this younger generation of evangelicals come up and say like, whoa, okay, like let's dial that back. Let's engage with the culture. Let's watch movies. Let's listen to rock music. But then the evangelicals still didn't solve the fundamental problem, which was actually creating something better, actually providing a superior alternative. Instead, they just made themselves subject to Disney brain.
So my final topic for tonight is, let's say, Peter Thiel contacts us, and for some reason he wants us to make a Christian film, and he says the sky's the limit. Don't worry about the budget. What would we make? Because we're here, talking and criticizing, but what would we make instead? And I don't have an answer. I don't know if you guys do. I mean, I have ideas.
I mean, I would try to make high quality Bible movies. To find, I mean, and if you have total artistic freedom in script writing, it's trying to figure out how to make movies to capture the imagination around figures like Abraham, Moses, David, Elijah, and so on.
Yeah, that's what Nate Wilson has been working on, a King David miniseries for Lionsgate for like forever, but I don't know.
I think I heard about that.
Might be trapped in development hell, but last I heard he was still chipping away at it. But
I mean, the struggle, I think, is it's not just representing these characters in a way that captures people's interest in them. It's also the kind of cosmological worldview of the Bible, of the sovereign God, who is not like, is not this dualistic Zoroastrian kind of sense of, heaven versus hell. Which side are you going to pick? Are you in the hell faction or the heaven faction? And this is all, and then, this is all part of this kind of RPG gamification or RP gamification of how theology operates. But I think it's just, you have to, the only way you can kind of derive a stronger culture is just soaking in the world of the Old Testament. And if you don't understand the Old Testament, the New Testament will be totally misunderstood. And I think this is part of the problem where, I think you start to see more and more evangelical pastors who will just openly say, like, the Old Testament sucks, I don't like it, I'm not teaching it.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of our loss. We don't really understand. I mean, it's not that, you can't get this out of the New Testament, but all the alien, strange parts that make up the Bible's metaphysics are often misread or misinterpreted in the New Testament.
yeah, so basically what we need is a young generation of Christian filmmakers who have read James Jordan through new eyes and...
Yeah, basically that would probably go light years ahead of what we're at now.
Yeah, and who are willing to kind of start from scratch. I think that starting small, I'm trying to do some projects like this with my buddies here in town. Got a lot of guys who are into media and kind of small time filmmaking. I think it'd be good to start small with what indie films can do best, which is, just trying to have excellent dialogue, trying to have very small scale, compelling dramas, using your local environment. And so I think if we can figure out how to do that, then maybe we'll prove ourselves responsible to take on higher budget things.
Well, my idea for a Christian film is basically about a bunch of people who fight against the deep state, and they like blow up like FEMA headquarters or whatever, and hopefully it would be prophetic. It would be of things to come. That's my idea of a Christian.
Yeah, you gotta plant that idea in people's heads so it becomes a hyperstition.
Yeah, predictive programming.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I feel like, like going back to like the Giga fundamentalists, like I know ones who like say like all actors are going to hell because they're professional liars, which all right, I don't think so, but I would say actors are going to hell because they're degenerates or because they're atheists or because but not because
I think if they're seducing, if their acting is seducing people into sin, they're going to be judged for that.
Yeah, they will. We will all be judged for the influence we have on people. I don't think that's something people consider.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts? It's been a good episode. I enjoyed the discussion. I'm going to do the soy podcaster thing where we all pat each other on the back and say, it's what a great time.
Great job, guys. Yeah.
But any closing thoughts?
I would say that, I think it's possible for evangelical Christians working hard and humbly and intelligently. I think it is possible, especially now more than ever, because the culture has degenerated so much. I think it's possible for us to create things that have some aesthetic merit. Maybe we won't be right away at the level of a Tarkovsky or attain that degree of influence. But I think the crown is kind of lying in the gutter. And so if people are willing to actually criticize each other and actually push themselves hard enough with the degree of perfectionism and intensity that it takes to sort of gain that cultural ground, I think that I think God could bless it, and I think it could reap a lot of fruit from that. But that's
Well,
my
actually,
instinct.
I'm glad you mentioned that, like perfectionism, like Michelangelo. Like, do any of you guys know anything about Michelangelo? He was insane, basically, and I think that's kind of why we don't really have a good artists, because we're kind of preoccupied with other things, whether it be our faith or our careers or whatever. But like Michelangelo was like nuts. I'm pretty sure he was like stealing corpses, so he could practice sculpting the body. I'm pretty sure I recall reading about that somewhere.
Well, this is why I mean, I'm not trying to just dig up the Puritans in a very crude, mimicking fashion, but when you look at what they were able to do in the 17th century, they established these fairly effective networks that crisscrossed all levels of society, from the court all the way down to villages and peasants, providing resources, providing means to promote one another. And this is why they were considered so dangerous, because they were all friends with each other and helped each other out. And this is what then, created the patronage system to produce works of art.
And America, ultimately.
Focus. What's that?
And America as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Eventually they were over on the continent, and, they were making money over here. They weren't just in New England. They were experiments on some of these islands that England had taken. But anyway, the point is, establishing these networks to mutually support one another as an effective means to not to separate, right? This is what makes Puritans different than the Brownists or the Separatists, but to purify the English world in which they lived in and bring a stronger sense of the gospel. And again, this is just because this is what's been on my mind. The crowning work is John Milton in being the greatest English poet to have ever lived. And that's no small feat. And I think being able to think about it in this way, not in a sheer negation that, the apocalypse is coming, that the next dispensation is happening, the rapture is coming, so we don't really have to care or worry about this stuff. But having this kind of almost post-millennial, you don't have to adopt that eschatology, but you're almost having this post-millennial drive to think, what we do matters, and what we create will be used to adorn the city of God. And we should take this much more seriously, not as it's in self intrinsically saving, but as sort of the side effects or the waves that we make in pursuing what is true and eternal and holy. And I think if you don't have that vision, I mean, that's why, I think it was a joke, sort of offhand comment about reading James Jordan, but I think that's where you got to start. You have to start to see the world in a very different way, through a very different set of lenses. And then you can start to struggle for something. And again, it's not just individually, but trying to create networks of mutual support and influence and help that could fundamentally change the country, nation, empire, world you live in.
I think that best case scenario, that's what some of these Christian nationalist types will end up doing if they're smart. It seems to be what they're trying to do. I hope that it doesn't all go up in flames for them if they really trust the wrong people or get invested in the wrong projects. But at least I see them putting an emphasis on networking and building trust and building parallel institutions. So, I mean, I just had Douglas Wilson walk past my window a little bit ago, and there's people out there trying to put in the work to build an alternative culture, and we'll just have to see how it pans out.
Alrighty, well, thank you guys for your insights. I couldn't have done this one alone, so I look forward to the next time we'll discuss. I don't think we could ever really pull off Christian video games podcast. I don't think there's as much going on there. None really leads to mind.
There's Earthworm Jim by Doug Tennapel.
Technically FNAF, Deep Lore, FNAF is a Christian video game. No, we won't talk about that. But hopefully we come on to discuss some other time. So thank you to the listeners. Thank you, Cal, very much. Thank you, Mission Kid Ultra. And
it was my pleasure.
I'll put links to their YouTube channels, publications, etc. That you should follow. So thank you guys, and see you next time.